Investment Summit online, kindly sponsored by Xsolar. We're really excited about this event today and being able to make it free for developers, publishers and investors during this current pandemic to support the industry and perhaps try and fill the gap a little bit left by the cancellation of other live games business events. And the response has been absolutely amazing. We've had over 1,000 people register for the event. In fact, we sold out yesterday. We've got 200 publishers, platform holders and investors, and we have more than 1,400 meetings taking place today, which is just phenomenal, absolutely amazing. Being online also means that this particular GamesIndustry.biz Investment Summit is truly global as well. We've got companies taking part from more than 60 countries, including Brazil, Russia, Germany, Japan, Indonesia, the USA, Senegal, Australia, and more, which is just brilliant. And it's why we're running this event from 8 AM until midnight UK time to take into account as many time zones as we can. As well as the meetings today, there's a full conference program with some really great industry guests for talks, panels on topics including angel investment, pitching your game, crowdfunding, selling your studio, and more. And all our talks will be recorded and hosted on YouTube immediately afterwards as well. For all the live sessions like this one, you can ask questions via YouTube chat, and I'll be checking that and coming back in at the end of the session and presenting any questions that you may have. For all the conference session details and links, head to our event site, which is investmentsummit.gamesindustry.biz. That's investmentsummit.gamesindustry.biz, and you'll see all the sessions there and all the links. Hopefully, the GamesIndustry.biz Investment Summit today will provide you with some insights, information, industry contacts, useful advice, business knowledge, and also investment for your company and your games. So, our first session today features someone who is responsible for one of my favorite games of all time, Elite. Of course, that's David Braben OBE from Frontier Developments, and he's going to be interviewed by GamesIndustry.biz publisher, Chris String. Are you there, Chris? Over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris String. I'm the publisher of GamesIndustry.biz. I hope you're all safe and well in these strange times. I'd like to really thank Jamie for doing such a good job with all this. He's been running the Investment Summit for 10 years. We started doing them in London, and they've never been bigger. This is our biggest one we've ever done, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, as Jamie said, our first session today is with a real industry legend with almost 40 years in making games. His company has worked with many, many big third-party publishers. Not all of them have been great relationships, but Atari, LucasArts, Microsoft among them. And then before moving into self-publishing with Elite Dangerous, Planet Coaster, and Jurassic World Evolution. And now the business is beginning its journey into becoming a third-party publisher. So I'm delighted to welcome the CEO of Frontier Developments, David Braben. Hello, David.
Hello, thank you, Chris, for the lovely introduction. And you also didn't mention Planet Zoo, which came out November last year.
So, what an oversight. I love Planet Zoo. It's my favorite one as well. Last time we spoke was July last year, I think, during Develop Brighton on stage in a very different...
In a different world, yeah.
Different world. And I think a couple of weeks before, I went to see your lovely offices in Cambridge, which I still think they still can call them new offices. They're very shiny. But I guess
they're staying shiny because the odd tumbleweed goes past. Apart from that, you know.
Well, I was going to say they're probably not being used very much at the moment. I mean, how have things been for you and the teams since the start of the pandemic?
Well, I think these are pretty challenging times for everybody. But you know, there are upsides here. I mean, we've been working hard to support all our people as well, but our teams have responded really, really well. I mean, you can see that from the fact that we've released 2 products actually during work from home during lockdown. Including the latest update for Planet Zoo, the South America pack, and also Elite Dangerous Fleet Carriers that I know some people are very excited about, with the second beta just having finished. But as a company, we're trying to make sure people stay engaged, because I think there's a wide range of different challenges people have. You know, that there are people working with children around them who may be just being a little bit fractious at the moment, given they're stuck in. But people are still trying to work and are managing to work very effectively, to be honest. Ranging from people who are just not getting a lot of social contact, which is difficult. We're trying to make sure we have social events, albeit online ones, as much as possible, and things we call tea breaks, where people get together socially and just chat, both after work and during work time. And making sure we've got well-being support for people. That's the other thing. That especially if you're a young person used to socializing all the time, you're suddenly on your own and you're working, and then you're sort of sleeping in a very similar environment. It can get to you. So I think that the thing is, we've got to be positive and supportive, and we're very lucky to be in a really great industry where, to be honest, from a financial point of view, things are going really, really well. And so there is that really good upside. The sales are up. We're seeing that the number of players in our games are up quite substantially. And so there's that really good positive side. And I think, some of this is actually quite sticky. We've seen around the world. We first saw it in China, where we saw quite a big uplift of people playing during their lockdown, which happened at least a month before ours, back in February. Now, what's interesting is we get sort of foresight of things as well, with China now substantially back to work. And we do see a slightly higher level of sales still persisting than we did beforehand. And I think what's interesting is you hear anecdotally from people, oh, I rushed out and bought a PlayStation or an Xbox or a PC or whatever, Switch or whatever, just before lockdown happened. And of course, I've been playing it intensively ever since. But you've still got it after lockdown finishes. And if you, especially with our games, a lot of which are quite social, so we build communities around each of the games, as you know, and thank you to those communities if you're watching this and you're part of them. But, if you build up those friendships, they're likely to stay afterwards, especially if you're not geographically close. The obvious way to keep in touch with those people is through the same game that you got in touch with them in the first place. Mm. So overall, I think there is a really strong silver lining here. And so for us, and this is the difficulty, isn't it? You don't want to be going, oh, things are great and all this thing, because I know some people are finding it hard. And we know some people's partners they've been made redundant, or they're struggling. So it's trying to keep a balance there. But overall, for our industry, it's actually been pretty good. And I think the other thing that we've seen is we've really seen an acceleration of the transition from physical to digital. We've all been seeing that happen quite quickly. But that is a good thing, because it's probably 2 to 3 years away before physical more or less goes away, I think. And it's probably accelerated that timescale a bit. Mm.
I sort of look at the digital European digital data, and the PlayStation and Xbox sales are up this year, which is which is unheard of in a year where they're about to move consoles. Right. So and now there's a load of new console owners, right, in the market who maybe lapsed gamers or completely new to that ecosystem. So that's an interesting phenomenon.
No, I think it's good, and there is evidence that once people become gamers, they're much more likely to stay being gamers.
Particularly if the TV and film industries take a little while to get up and going and get those, particularly the TV industries, because there might be a lack of content towards the end of the year.
Yes, and it's quite interesting actually how some TV shows have found it really struggle to move online, if you like. They just feel they're a bit soulless now. The audience makes such a big difference. Whereas we think with games, actually the environment hasn't substantially changed. I mean, if anything, it's changed for the better, because there are just so many more players around.
Now, you obviously speak to a lot of investors. Frontier is a public company. How are they feeling about the games business right now?
Well, I think that we're essentially seen as, and rightly so to an extent, as a relatively safe haven against this sort of problem, because there is talk of things being a little bit recessional afterwards as well, because it might take a while for the wider world to recover from this essentially great big blow. And if you look historically, our industry has always been, our industry and alcohol, ironically, always been up a bit during times of recession, because we're cheap entertainment. So I think we're seen as quite a good port in a storm. So I think there's quite a lot of positivity towards our industry at the moment.
Okay, well, that's reassuring. We're not actually here to talk about coronavirus, although that's likely to be a theme throughout most of the talks today. We're here to talk about publishing, and your experience with publishing is probably better than most. I mean, you're self-published now, but before I used to work with numerous publishers in the past, and some experiences have been good and some haven't been so good. What would you say is something developers should be wary of when sort of working for publishers? What should be the warning signs?
It's easy to dwell on the negative, but I think look at the other portfolio of games that a publisher makes, because the key thing with a publisher is there is a necessary trust there, and it has to be two-way. You know, looking at the publishers we've worked with, where it's worked well, it's where the publishers have quite a lot of development experience, because the challenge is development. You know, when you go into a creative process at the start, you can't say 100% it will be exactly like this, because quite often paper designs, and we all know it, they don't necessarily translate brilliantly into real life. You can read something and go, oh, that sounds great, and then you have it and you go, oh, actually it is a bit obvious, isn't it? You know, it's not, you don't have that fun. Fun is it's a complicated process getting there, and there's a lot of subtlety to it. And just about every game I've been involved with, we've gone through a phase where we're thinking, oh, this isn't quite what we'd hoped for. How do we make it better? How do we make it richer, more interesting? And there are some publishers where there is a necessary, you know, this is the design document, thou shalt stick to it or else, which is that's not a good idea. It has to be the baby of the person who's creating it. They have to be able to sort of take it all the way from concept to delivery, to be, you know, so in terms of that, it's important, but it also has to be, this is why I'm saying about it's the two-way trust thing. There also has to be the oversight of the bigger picture. You know, is this thing going to be good, or is it going to be something that's sort of transformed into something very different? So it's a cooperative venture, and I think the more people we're interfacing with who are from a development background historically, that's always worked a lot better. One of the challenges with a lot of publishers that we've worked with is quite a lot of the people you interface with have come up from a marketing background, which is fine because they understand the marketing side, but they don't necessarily understand the ugly development process it might take to get there. Some of the best games I've worked on have looked plug ugly for quite a lot of their development period. And that's because once you make something look beautiful, you then have this mindset where you can't tweak it, because then a lot of the beauty has to be recreated. You know, that is the problem. That there is, you know, there's a concept in the industry which is, you know, programmer art, where something is just really rudimentary. And that's because you can also afford to throw it away very easily, and that is valuable. You know, you can change, whether it's changing jump distances, whether it's changing how something is rendered, or all of that sort of thing. And I think it's an important part of the creative process to be able to break things as well and remake them. And I think certainly in the early stages of this industry, there was this concept when milestones first came in, that each milestone you had to polish and make it look like a finished game. But then you ended up tearing down a lot of that in order to move forward. I've likened it to showing off a house before you've done the plumbing. You know, you end up digging up all the floors and walls to put pipes in, and then, you know, you have to make them pretty again. You know, I think it's that sort of challenge, and I'm sure a lot of other developers would empathize with what I'm saying, because it's that make work which is soul destroying for the artists and animators to an extent, if they know it's being built on shaky foundations that are about to change. I mean, there is always going to be an element of change, and we have great creative people in our industry. And what I don't want to do is waste their time or sort of belittle their input. I think that's the key point, that if you've come from a development background and are used to seeing that process, you can also be sympathetic when you see that process from the other side of the table. And I think that's what I mean with those a lot of really good publishers we've worked with. You know, I don't want to criticize people for the process, because it's a difficult process. And we should not pretend that's not the case. But it's also a process where there are awful lot of a lot of love and a lot of people's sort of, it's what they care about goes into it. So you just, it's a difficult process to make sure that it's as good as it possibly can be. And so it needs flexibility on both sides. I think that's the important thing. Look for development experience in the publisher.
Is that what made the partnership, because you had Microsoft partnership was very fruitful. Was that what made that work?
To an extent. There's also, dare I say, the grubby word, there's a financial side to it as well. One of the fantastic things with Microsoft is they repeatedly paid on time, and they paid the amount we were expecting. And that wasn't necessarily the case with all the publishers we worked with. Mm. You know, and that can be a real problem. I mean, especially speaking as, you know, having led the company for such a long time, and even before Frontier existed, working with publishers on a sort of freelance basis. Quite a number of them just wouldn't pay terribly late, and then would pay a small amount of what was owed. You know, and that is terrible when you start thinking, oh my God, where's next month's payroll coming from? You know, it ends up distracting from the development process. So you want a company that is sound financially as well.
I was going to do audience questions at the end, but we do have one that's from Matt Hall, which I think might help us segue into the next part of our conversation, which is, okay, will Frontier continue to work for publishers, or is that something you've left behind completely?
I think never say never, but we've left it behind, to be honest. I can't imagine it being anything like the freedom we've got now to do what we're doing is immensely valuable. You know, and I think in terms of what we're doing, you know, that the sorts of games we're doing, we're not being held back. You know, if anything, we're working with other companies is obviously something we will do, because I'm sure we'll get on to the third-party publishing, which is an extremely exciting opportunity for the future. But no, I think we've pretty well left that behind.
Well, because obviously people sort of see the self-publishing sort of started with Elite Dangerous in 2014, but it actually started earlier than that. And I remember the excellent Lost Winds on Wii in 2008, I think, and then the sequel as well, which you published yourselves. What made you want to do it then?
I think, to be honest, I've wanted to do it since 2003, 2004, where working with a particular publisher, where, you know, we were doing a lot of the marketing materials. We were a key part of that process, and it struck me that, I mean, I'm not going to name the publisher, but people will probably be able to work out who I'm talking about. You know, that even the finances were coming externally to the publisher, and I thought, well, wait a second, surely we can just cut out the middleman and go direct to the players, because, you know, we're trying to think what the publisher was really bringing to the table. And I think the challenges in those, for much personally, much of my career, the route to market has been the critical factor. You know, that the limiting factor wasn't the quality of the games, surprisingly. It was, were those games on the shelves in retail? And that route to market was owned essentially by distribution and a relatively small number of publishers. So you had to work with a publisher. And it was the rise of digital sales that we started to see then. You know, the internet existed, but was a bit rubbish for most of us, and gradually got better. And the WiiWare service was the first digital console games deployment service. There were bits and pieces. We tried things on PC before then, but they weren't big. And Steam was just coming up then, you know, in terms of Valve talking about the distribution. And so it was an opportunity, and we thought, well, we've got to, you know, it's very easy to believe your own hype. This is one of those grim truths of the world, you know, where you think, oh, we can do that. How hard can it be? You know, but actually a publisher does an awful lot. There's all the relationships, you know, in order to bring something to market, finding the audience, and, you know, getting people to hear about it. And it was very helpful to test out that process, to really see, do we believe our own hype? Can we, without a publisher standing over us, can we hit milestones? Can we hit delivery dates? Can we hit quality? And that is quite a big challenge. You essentially have to act as your own publisher. You have to, there has to be someone saying, right, let's ship it now. Because the problem is with any creative enterprise, something is never finished. You always want to go and tweak it. You go, oh, that third bit, I'm not quite happy with it. Let's go and tinker. And one of the problems with this industry is the temptation to tinker can be fatal, because you will forever tinker. There is a story, and I don't know quite how apocryphal it is, but of Turner breaking into the Royal Academy and editing one of his own pictures because the lighting was wrong on. So I can't even remember what it was, but apparently he broke in, tweaked the thing that had just been annoying him so much, and then essentially broke out again, and someone noticed. I think that it was alluded to in the biographical film recently. But the point with that is, you know, that I mean, I've had it with Elite as well. You know, you just think, oh, I wish we'd tweak this way. And each of these tweaks make a game better, but it's diminishing rewards. And there has to come a point where you say, right, let's ship it. And I think one of the things that's worked really well for me with our games is they now don't, I mean, saying they're unfinished is a terrible thing to do, but you can continually improve them. Do you see what I mean? There is that opportunity to put out updates, add new things to it. And I think that's the change here. But I think when it comes to Lost Winds, go back to your point, to show that we could do that process, that we could be disciplined, we could release it on the date, because that had a very, very fixed date to release, which is the launch of the WiiWare service, which we hit. And the team working on that did an incredible job.
It then took you 5 years. Well, and there was Lost Winds too, but then it was like 5 years before Elite Dangerous. I mean, what took so long? Was it that actually it was trickier than you thought, or was it the Microsoft money was too appealing?
Well, I think there was an element of that with a company. The bigger a company gets, you've always got to have one eye on where the money's coming from next month, 6 months time, and all that sort of thing. And I think the working with Microsoft was very good, because it was a real positive to see money coming in regularly and not having to chase it. But also we were seeing the changes in the industry. And so we had decided we did want to publish a big game ourselves, and it was building up that knowledge, that experience, all the contacts to do so. And I think for us, it was very much also the right place at the right time. I think had we gone any later, it would have been quite hard to get heard. If you think how quickly digital services, particularly Steam, got very crowded. So we were in that window. We could see the window opening. We could also see when it was likely to close. So we wanted to make sure that what we went with was a really, really good game. A lot of love went into Elite Dangerous. Those sort of games, it's a difficult game to make. It would be a really hard game to make using one of the excellent, but the third-party engines, just because some of the requirements, like the draw distances, are absolutely immense. To see across a solar system, even to see across a planet, you very quickly get out of the range that you can do with 32-bit rendering, and so all the rendering, all of the maths, everything, it has to be 64-bit plus. All of those challenges you have to engineer, and that was partly the reason we did the Kickstarter as well. The Kickstarter was really important for us. Both to bring that community together to focus on it, but also to make sure we could put all those technologies together, because we knew it would take a while to get such a rich, deep game together. And I think it was great because the community were incredibly supportive of us as well, and it's really appreciated.
I mean, so is it something that you recommend other developers do then, go down the route that you've taken?
I think it's a lot of the things. I mean, a lot of my career, it's been right place, right time, which is good. I've been luck is always a big factor. I think you couldn't do what we did now because I think that one of the things that's a real shame is crowdfunding. The mood of crowdfunding has changed quite significantly. And I think that's a challenge. But I also think at that point we were still, if you like, building the online high street. Nowadays it's much harder to get in. It's harder to get heard. I think by all means try it, but you've got to have something to get you that leg up, to get you that visibility. And I think even for us it was quite a big challenge. And obviously there was a lot of love and nostalgia for games like Elite, and of course for Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, which is still selling well, and enabled us to do Planet Coaster. Because if anything, Planet Coaster was just as big a challenge for us to bring to market as Elite was. And we were doing that. People saying, "Oh, it's a new IP, people won't have heard of." Clearly Atari were bringing out Roller Coaster Tycoon World at the same time. And that worked very well for us. Don't get me wrong, but it's just bearing in mind there are always challenges here. A friend of mine used to say, a company's like a swan going along the water, and underneath the water, the legs are frantically paddling away to make it look graceful. Yeah. And there's a lot like that happens where you know what it's like when you're putting together a show or whatever. Things change, things go wrong at the last minute, but it's just you've got to have the contingency, the planning to be able to cope with those humps and bumps that come along.
What were the big things you needed to do before you became a developer who permanently self-published? What were the big things you had to add?
I think there are two things. That there is the transition in terms of funds. The beauty with milestone payments is in theory, they cover the expenses for that month or that 6-week period or whatever. Whereas with publishing, the money is essentially massively back-ended. And it's also risky. You don't know for certain you're going to get that money back. Historically, we've always got it back many fold. And I think the big challenges in making that transition is, and one of the great things is, one of the problems also with Silverdisk is you've got to make those in advance, pay for them in advance, and then store them, warehouse them. So there's a huge inventory risk there, which has now gone away for the digital sales. But I think it's confidence and understanding of the market. We have been very good at forecasting, because the other thing, you say, the transition between Lost Winds and when we actually published Elite Dangerous, there were a lot of things we did in parallel at that point to get ready. We started forecasting everybody's games before they were out, and got very good at getting probably plus minus 10-15% on the sales. And it's because you have to have a real understanding of what's in the game, how good the game is going to be, in those days, I think review scores were probably more important than they are now. But they're still a very good measure of the quality of the game. The quality is the key thing. And that's one of the things, the game has to be good. You can't just have it'll do. You have to make it as good as you can do, because you're competing with other people that you can't necessarily see. One of the big mistakes you can make in this industry is to look at the games on sale now and go, oh, we can do better than that. Because you're not competing with the games on sale now. You're competing with the games that are on sale in a year's time or 18 months' time, depending on how long you plan to develop. And I think that's the key thing. And if you look how quickly our industry is moving, that is a very sort of, it's a dangerous factor. It's something that you've really got to factor in. And I think in order for that preparation, to go back to the question, to transition from being a developer to a publisher, you are then taking that responsibility of planning, of understanding the risk and the mitigations for those risks. Well,
you're now moving to publishing other people's games. You're becoming a third-party publisher yourself. So you might have already answered the question there, but why do that?
Well, actually, the same process applies, and we can help other people. One of the things that really frustrated me for actually the 38, nearly 39 years I've been in the business, that through most of that period, there weren't publishers that I felt really understood the development process. You know, there were elements with some of them, you know, like Microsoft and actually LucasArts as well, where there were key sort of development elements in it, which really did understand the process, which is really good. So, you know, don't get me wrong. The process here isn't to criticize, it's to make the process better. You know, and it's to understand it. So I think that firstly, it's a service we could offer, but it's also a way for us to get greater scale as well. So there's a mutual benefit here. You know, that we've got an excellent and pretty big marketing and publishing team at Frontier now. And you know, that people say, oh well, you've only released 4 games. Actually, no, we haven't. If you think that each year we've, I think last year we released 56 different titles across 24 or SKUs across 24 different things. But if you count the PlayStation version separate from the Xbox version, because that you really need to do that. If you look at it from a publishing point of view, each one has its own promotional cadence, you know, its own relationships, its own videos, its own appearance on the stores. You know, each one of those is like a separate product. So if you're going, you know, across PC, PlayStation, Xbox, whatever, each one has to have its own separate process. So we released 24 things across 56 different products. And the key thing there is that is quite a lot of throughput. If you think of all the updates for Planet Coaster, for Planet Zoo, for Jurassic World Evolution, for Elite Dangerous, whether they're free or paid, they still need that launch process and that whole sort of community building exercise around it. You know, there's a lot of moving parts go into that process that are really important. And so when you start publishing other titles, that experience is absolutely invaluable. And in those early days, it's that sort of experience that we would really have benefited from. And dare I say it, especially in those early days, a lot of those publishers just didn't have that experience or knowledge. They were surviving on the fact that, particularly in the early days, the 80s and 90s, most of the things that got published by the big publishers were going to succeed because games were immensely popular, and there was a lot of rubbish published as well as a lot of good things. Not that I was involved in any of those, of course, the rubbish ones.
Well, there are a lot of publishers out there at the moment offering developers support. What do you think makes Frontier different?
I think we're very development focused. That's the key thing. And you know, that other publishers are great. You know, it's coming up with you know, it's that relationship building. You know, how can we help bring your precious baby to market with all of the support that it needs to make it great? Because the key point here is that you know, a lot of games languish right at the bottom of the charts and never actually get that success you occasionally see when something like bubble up and be great, but there are a lot of potentially good games that just aren't getting the airtime. You know, so it takes a publisher to do that. And so the question would be, you know, which publishers are going to be more successful with your baby to do that?
You first mentioned wanting to go to become a third-party publisher, an interview we did back in 2018, and then you had your first deal in place in the summer of 2019. I mean, how have things progressed since then?
Well, we've got 5 deals in place and a number of others that we're discussing with people at the moment. So I would say it's progressed really well. I'm very excited about the projects we've got that are sort of in the pipeline, so to speak. And we will be talking about those at some point in not the hugely distant future. We've said that 2 of those will be coming out in our financial year 2021 and 3 in financial year 2022 with potential for more. You know, so we've got a cadence. We're not rushing hugely rapidly into it because we want to make sure we get it right. And what I hope is that when we're talking in a year, 2 years time, and you're probably talking to the people that we're publishing as well, that they will look and think that was great. You know, that because with all of these things, we with Frontier's own games, and we hope with the third-party games, we want things that will be remembered 10 years from now fondly. And hopefully the titles that we've done in the past, many people can just name them. Look at Roller Coaster Tycoon 3; it's still very popular even after the release of Planet Coaster. Elite, obviously. Dog's Life. They're fondly remembered titles that have stood out from the crowd. And what I hope is that we will give that, that people will get the attention, so that there's the chance for games that we publish also to be successful long term. And what I would hope also is the people who publish their game with us will want to come back to us. That's the ultimate test. They will say, oh, we've got another game coming along. Can we step and repeat? Can we do what you did with our previous game? And that's the test. So we want to make sure that people feel that they've been treated well, that they want to do it again, because we're in this for the long term.
Oh, great. Well, that's really good. I've got a couple more questions, but I'm conscious of the time. Jamie, do we have any questions in the YouTube?
Yes, we've had quite a few actually. So shall I ask one?
Yeah, go for it.
Great. Okay. The first one, I apologise for the pronunciation, Aditya. David, how did you get funding for your company in its early stages?
Essentially, because the company was founded in January '94, and I just transferred all of the things that I had been doing individually into the company. So essentially, I ultimately funded it. Because don't forget, I'd been successful already at that point for more than 10 years. I'd done a succession of games under my own name. And actually the sad thing, and that was working with other people, with great people like Chris Sawyer as well. And the sad thing is, if you're working with a load of people freelance, and I'm sure you see it in your industry a lot, the team disperses to the four winds at the end of a project. You go, oh, well, that's, you're almost like having to do it again for a new project each time. And I thought, well, surely having a company vehicle would make a lot of sense. And that's essentially what happened. And it meant I was able to build up an engine, build up a body of knowledge, if you like, because it had got to the point where a single-digit number of people, a small number of people, couldn't make a game a hugely successful game anymore, or at least it felt like that. And working on the game Frontier Elite 2 took 5 years, and that was me working end to end and working with other people along the way as well, and great people as well, including Chris Sawyer, who did the PC version on the latter stages of that. And I found it was soul destroying, because when I started the project, it looked absolutely market leading. By the end of it, it was still up there, but it wasn't, and it is such a big code base. I thought, never again. I would much rather work with 3 or 4 people and do it in a quarter of the time.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We've had another question as well from Ross. A few people wanted to hear the answer to this, actually. Do you think the mid-market is getting more competitive since the introduction of smaller titles for subscription services?
Yeah, mid-market's a funny term, isn't it? It's I think in terms of subscription services, I think they provide a really good thing. If you look at the long tail of games, I mean, one of the things, Elite, if you count the early access, is now in its 7th year, and it's still doing incredibly well. And subscription services are things that can help support games as well going forward. And I think we've looked over the period of lots of different business models, subscription services, game-based subscriptions, free to play, all those things. If you look at them, they all have a different effect on the play style of the games, and to an extent, it's horses for courses. Some kinds of games lend themselves to it, and others don't. So I think it's just it's our industry. We've had so many changes every year. Every single year, you can look back and you can probably put 2 or 3 changes into every year that were really big changes. And in other industries, they would be transformative. But we're just so used to sort of galloping over them that we take them in our stride. And I think this is just one of those. And I think in a year's time, we'll just go, yeah, oh, yeah, obviously that's what happened, and this kind of game works well. It's like free to play. People say, oh, that's going to completely destroy the industry. And it has certainly changed sectors of the industry, and it's changed, but the thing that, to me, it's also changed the games. I really don't like the way some free-to-play games operate now, with the progress bars that you can pay away and all that stuff. That's really irritating. And in a sense, it's spoiled what could have been quite good games. So I think, and we will adapt, and we'll see those evolve yet again. So it's not like we're at an end point here. And so I think that's true with subscription games.
Great.
If I answered the question well enough.
Yeah, I think that did, definitely. I think we've got one that's more general, actually, that I wanted to ask, which was the fact that we've got like hundreds of developers pitching their games today to investors and publishers, including yourselves at Frontier. So what advice would you give to those developers that are pitching today?
Really believe in what you do, because if you don't believe in it, the thing I think people don't seem to appreciate is you will be working on it for a long time. So it really should be something you really love and can defend and understand and want to be involved and identified with that. And that's true, by the way. That's not a criticism. It's just think of it like that and think, well, how can I make it better? What will this look like from the other side of the table? Why would they go with me? Why does my creation stand out from the other, dare I say it, hundreds, thousands even, of games that are being made, many of which sadly don't succeed. But the ones that don't succeed tend to be the ones where you think, oh God, it's another one of those with a very, very slight variant. It's got to have something that makes it stand out.
Yeah,
good, great stuff. Chris, have you got anything else to add?
Well, you asked my question, Jamie. So thanks for that. I might. There was interesting. Matt Hall over on the chat did ask something about your publishing stuff. David has asked. There's quite a big target audience gap between Elite Dangerous and Planet Zoo. With your third-party publishing, are you planning to narrow the types of games you publish, or is it just a matter of this is a good game and build the marketing around it?
Actually, if you look at each of our games audiences, they don't intersect that much. Jurassic World, for example, is a game we're extremely proud of. Very sort of slightly quite male teenage audience is the big sort of hump. Whereas you look at Elite Dangerous, it's much broader, still very male. Look at Planet Coaster, Planet Zoo, very sort of more or less equal male female, and also very wide age range spread, particularly in Planet Zoo, and so. Each is different. So yes, we're not looking to restrict ourselves. Each one gives us more reach, where in terms of the audience, if you're looking for your game to be published by us, we've not said we're niche. We've almost said we're the opposite. There is a value in having coverage across lots of different genres. I don't know, those people who've seen that we've announced we're doing a real-time strategy game with Games Workshop using Warhammer Age of Sigmar. It shows that we are, even with our internal games, moving into different areas, sort of wider areas of the wider games market, if you like. Even though they still have sort of simulation at their core, they're something that we've really wanted to do and are confident we can do really well. So if we're not restricting the games. What we've said is we want to publish games that we want to be made, that we feel should be made. It could do really well. I mean, I once in a talk many years ago, as I described game space as being absolutely huge with these islands here and there that we've discovered. Like if you think of first-person shooters, so many of them were almost identical. And then something like Fortnite comes along, which is just a little bit different, the whole battle royale mindset, and takes some of their audience and mixes it up a bit. There are huge amounts of space between all the different games that are being made. And when we see games that are there and actually you think, oh, there's nothing really like that people go, oh, that's a negative, therefore it won't sell. Actually, no. Actually, the uniqueness itself is a value.
Well, thank you very much, David. I think we're out of time. It's been really fascinating to talk to you. I can always talk to you for hours, and hopefully we will do soon in person. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll be back in about 15 minutes. Is that right, Jamie, with Xbox?
Yeah, we're next up in 15 minutes at 10:30. We've got opportunities with ID at Xbox featuring Ago Simonetta. You can find the YouTube link to that in Meet to Match and on the investmentsummit.gamesindustry.biz site. So we'll see you at 10:30.
Thank you very much.
Chris. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, everybody.